Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to talk about focal points in the garden. These are things that kind of lead the eye, maybe on a corner of a path, the corner of a house, the corner of something. We're going to talk through how to think about having focal points in your garden. This gold weeping redbud happens to be a focal point. You know, when it leaves out in the spring, it has these big, beautiful gold leaves with a little bit of pink in the new growth as well. The stems on it in the new growth during the season are colorful. And then even in the wintertime, here we are with this upright structure here in the garden. And it was placed here in this particular spot for a reason, and that's what we're going to talk through in this video. One of the big values of having focal points in the garden, and we'll talk about other things that can be focal points than trees as well in this video, is that they can sit at the end of paths, like this weeping redbud. Okay, so you got this path that runs straight to me from a gate that's behind the camera right now, and as Steph progresses with the camera, again, this is, I mean, it's not quite at the end of the path, it's slightly offset from it, but you get to this point where you can go right or you can go left, and then, over here to the right, we made the shed one of the focal points at the end of the path. So you take one path, leads you to a focal point, okay, and then when you get to there, then you have a decision to make, and hopefully you look left and right, and at the end of those lines, you also have some sort of focal point that's a big impact item in the garden. The scale of your focal points really matters. I talk about this in consultations quite a bit, where somebody's in a really large suburban house on a very large lot. You do need to find spaces in a landscape like that to put things in that have some size to them, to fit the scale of the garden, to fit the scale of the size of the lot and the size of the house. We're on 0.19 acres here in Raleigh, North Carolina. It would make no sense to put something in that's going to get 75 feet tall. It's just going to be so out of scale in this garden, or a giant fountain, with a lady holding an urn, above her head, or, whatever it is. A giant fountain just wouldn't work, in the scale of this. So picking your garden art, your, any, again, fountain, any kind, even if you were putting in some sort of other water feature, if I did half of this front garden with a giant waterfall that's 6 feet tall, it just is not going to fit this space. I can do that, I just need to scale it to the size. This evergreen dogwood is one of our main focal points out here. Steph is standing on the front garden steps out here, and so we have this in a line of sight from the front, and it's going to have seasonal changes on it. It's pretty big. The house is this is not a plant we could probably put up against the house over here. In order to have something of this size, we need to move it out a bit, and it needs to have a point where it's 15 feet or something like that. It's probably about the tallest thing we would want out here to fit the scale of the property and fit the scale of the house. We just recently in a video moved this contorted Tomukiyama Japanese maple to this spot, and so we have a screen porch back here, and just looking out of it, realized, first of all, this was in a terrible spot to be able to see the fact that I've contorted the trunk over the years. So we wanted to get it out to where it was in a spot that we would consider a focal point, and this one just kind of lines up with the back door on the screen porch. One of the things about focal points is the seasonal changes that can occur in them. So this, obviously, right now, it just has this contorted trunk and is not as interesting as it might be other times of the year. Whereas we're here in December, we're going to have conifers in the garden. It could be interesting, something like a blue spruce, would be an example of that, or some sort of weeping Atlas cedar, something that's contorted, that doesn't change, season to season. This gold holly back here would be an example of that. It just kind of, you don't really pay any attention to it until things started to, go to sleep, and then all of a sudden the golden Oakland holly becomes a bit of a star out here through the winter months. The The weeping redbud that we started the conversation with here happens to look great as it leafs out. It has, again, that beautiful gold foliage, and then when it's dormant, it has that weeping habit, so it still has some interest. So you may have seasonal change where a focal point actually changes during the during the growing season. Maybe it's something leafing out with fresh new foliage that draws the eye in, and then later something that's close by it comes into flower, and it flowers for some period of time, and that creates the focal point. It may be fall color. It might be, again, conifers and gold and chartreuse evergreen plants that really show off during the winter months. And so those changes can happen during the year and actually kind of change your focal points in the garden. So reiterating, focal points can be flowers, foliage color, fall color, the shape or the structure of the plant, but as plant collectors, sometimes we can take this a little too far, and I think we have an example of that right here. I have this fantastic, interesting, contorted shape of this Japanese maple with great spring color and then great fall color. Then why not throw in a butterfly bush that blooms during the summertime that has this kind of blue-green foliage, and the holly that I had pointed out with the chartreuse color on it. The white wedding hydrangeas back here, which come into flower, midsummer and bloom until fall. All of them individually are probably great focal point pieces, but we've overdone it a bit, and we're in the process of redesigning some spaces out here. Because again, we're just plant collectors, and we're buying all these plants, and a lot of them would fit the bill for being focal points individually. But we've got a little bit of rearranging to do here. Maybe a couple things actually have to go, because I'm surrounded by what amounts to 6 focal points in this one space right now, or it could be individually focal points. And that's okay. You may have a couple things together, again, that could reiterate, that they're doing different things at different times, right? And that's okay. But I think once you get to a certain point, though, we need to let one or two things that are in this section really shine on their own. So we're in the process of figuring that out in our own garden. All kinds of things can be focal points in the garden. It's not just a plant or, an interesting weeping plant or, something that shows off because of, flower color or whatever. It can also be garden art. It can be arbors. We actually, when the new porch went on the house, there's some metal work that was part of the old porch that we have over here on the side of the house that's actually going to become an arbor entrance here. So we'll have, literally taken a part off the house and made this entryway a little more formal entryway to the garden. It can be fountains. It can be a large container, a big, beautiful container that you love. Waterfalls. There's all kinds of things. It can also be a destination in the garden. This front turf area at some point here is going to go, and we're going to have a bench seating area out in the front garden that will be, basically a destination. We'll have, some sort of pathway that will lead your eye to it in the garden. Sometimes it's also texture, this one's really interesting. This is a Shasta viburnum that we've been tree forming. I've been limbing it up over time. It has this beautiful textured leaves on it. It flowers, but more importantly, the texture of the foliage is just incredible. It was just a big open shrub, and we've kind of turned it into a focal point. By limbing it up, we've allowed us to put some things up under it, and now it really draws the eye into the end of this lawn area. Another chaos spot we have, this tree-formed Indian hawthorn, which is definitely here as a focal point, and it will absolutely stay here. One of our favorite plants in the garden. We have 2 other items right beside it that would also be focal points on their own in the garden, but right now they've just kind of created a little bit of chaos. This viburnum over here was always going to move, but I also have another limbed up cestrum back here behind it, and we're in the process of redesigning this and thinking through it and thinking about, we have these really amazing, interesting pieces here that lead your eye and can lead you through the garden, but a couple of them are just a bit of chaos around them. And I think once we move a couple things, these individual things are really, really going to stand out in the garden and lead you through it. I'd highly recommend that you make some sort of really, basic drawing and think about where you come out of your house, windows that you look out of. If you have a, living room window that happens to have a view of your back garden or your front garden, or, again, a rear, whatever exit you're taking out of the back of the house, and think about lining those focal points up with that. So this being our front steps here, we have this straightaway little stone path that I did here. We're going to put that arbor over that entryway there. The dogwood is already here. When you take this right, I just showed you the viburnum and the tree-formed Indian hawthorn over here to this side. But then we have negative focal points. We have, our cars are over here in the driveway. We have cars parked on the street in front of us here. We're just in an urban space, and there's a lot of people parking on the road. You can probably see up the road now. So we're in the process of kind of thinking out, when we come out the door here, how can you basically take your eye away from those negative focal points? And so there's probably some other thing that we'd like to do over here on this front corner that would be something that you would look at first before you look at the more negative things that are parked around you. Or in the back garden, we have the screen porch, which I was already talking about. And when we started the video here, you're on the end of this path coming in from the side of the house, and that red bud is the focal point. The shed back over here to the right, is one of the focal points. We just moved the Japanese maple that we pointed out over here, which of course is asleep right now. But then again, we have another negative focal point back here, which is the neighbor's shed has got, green mold on the back of it. We have a couple plants that we've planted over there that are, we've got a screenplay holly that's growing very quickly, but it's just still going to be a minute before that, before that thing is covered up. We've planted a small Japanese maple over there that will eventually become the focal point of that corner for sure. There's a little time in between. So again, another negative focal point that we've been sitting here figuring, trying to take care of over some period of time, because when I come out here, I really don't, that's not the thing that I want to see, every time I walk out of the back porch. A couple of other focal points we have in the garden. One is the Stella Ruby magnolia, and it was placed out in a curve of pathway here to draw your eye to it, and it just absolute perfect. It grows like this on its own, and is a beautiful focal point. Have a windmill palm planted near the house on the corner over here. Again, it's when you come out the door, it's the first thing you're going to see to the right, and it's where the patio and a path kind of collide there. So it's placed there with intent. I say that, and then I look around this garden and know that we have changes that we have to make. I'm much better at this. I was much better at this as a landscaper, installing other people's landscapes, but as a plant collector in my own garden, it is definitely a much harder thing to do, to decide on just a few things that are going to be the focal points, the end of paths, the places that make you turn, or, instead we've gone and we've, lots and lots of plants have been planted out here, and it's just became an obvious thing that we needed to move a few things around here and create real focal points, and then have the other things be understory plants around those focal points to really allow them to stand out. So that's the thing we're working on this spring as we go forward, designing our front foundation area and other spaces in this garden, is reorganizing a bit. We have great pieces in place. And you may decide that in your own garden, that you have some sort of great piece that's there that should be a focal point, but you don't have a path to it. You don't have a way to it. You don't have a thing that kind of draws them, draws the eye to that space. So you may want to think about that too as you're standing out there. How can I kind of make that, the center of a bed? Maybe you're expanding a bed, redesigning your lawn in some way that puts that plant that you really love as kind of the centerpiece, of a garden space. So there you go. Those are the things we're working on this year. Focal points, I think they're one of the main things that leads people through a garden and really, draws the eye in, and hopefully to positive focal points and not a couple of the negative focal points that everybody's going to have, right? In any kind of garden space, you're going to have something that you're trying not to look at, and be careful. This is another thing to be careful with. If you plant something in the line of sight of something that is negative, it may draw their eye in, for some period of time before it before it blocks it. So, that can happen as well. Thank you guys very much for following along with the channel.